Tonight, award-winning journalist Jeff Greenfield. He joins to discuss the president, impeachment, and where we go from here. Then, one of the last House Democrats who held out an impeachment, he tells us tonight why he now supports the inquiry and the investigation into Donald Trump. Also, we will use the president's own words against him by showing you what he's been saying about Ukraine, the impeachment, then telling you what is really going on. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Now, instead of backing down on trying to get foreign countries to investigate Joe Biden, the president, unbelievably, on live television, doubled down. He's already asked Ukraine to probe the former vice president and now political opponent Joe Biden, and now he's asking China to do the same. It's the spark that lit the fiery debate over impeachment. President Trump privately urging Ukraine to investigate his potential 2020 rival, Joe Biden, and his son. Today, the president publicly amplifying that call.
Very simple answer. They should investigate the Bidens.
And now, he's pushing China to do the very same, sending the message days before Beijing officials arrive in the U.S. to resume trade talks.
China should start an investigation into the Bidens.
Back on Capitol Hill, the former special envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, who stepped down last week, testifying behind closed doors, turning over what appeared to be encrypted messages to Congress obtained by ABC News, where a top diplomat to Ukraine tells a group of other American diplomats that it's, quote, crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says when she spoke to the president last week about his call with Ukraine, he seemed shocked that she believed it violated his oath of office.
I saw the surprise in his voice that he didn't understand that I thought what he did was wrong.
Still, the president's focus on Biden and his son Hunter, who had overseas business dealings, where his father, as vice president, helped carry out the Obama administration's foreign policy. The current VP facing questions about his own role in the Ukraine controversy, but still standing firm behind his boss.
Well, there was no quid pro quo. There was no pressure.
As for Biden, there has been no findings whatsoever of wrongdoing by either him or his son. His campaign says the president's comments today echo this moment from the 2016 campaign and Trump's former rival, Hillary Clinton.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
President Trump says he has not asked the Chinese president to investigate the Bidens yet, but he also didn't rule it out. Shocking. Joining me now, award-winning journalist and author Jeff Greenfield. You know, I was going to go down a whole different line of questioning, but I think I just watched on live television a few hours ago the president violate the Constitution by not only reminding everybody what he wanted from the Ukrainians, but now the Chinese as well, to investigate a political opponent, to this point with baseless claims. I just don't know if it actually changes any minds on Capitol Hill.
That is what they used to say in radio days, the $64 question, and later the $64,000 question. Take a step back. We haven't had many examples of presidential impeachments, right? We've had 2.5 because Nixon left before he was actually impeached. The one thing we know is that if the president's political party stays with the president, then removal from office is impossible. And the question that you're raising here is, now that the president has sort of acknowledged, I want Ukraine to see if they can find bad stuff about Biden. I'd like the Chinese to do that. If that doesn't move the needle on the Republican side, if there aren't Republicans, particularly in the Senate, which would judge an impeachment, that say, this really is over the line. If we're staying in the totally polarized political world where if the guy's wearing your uniform, you're for him, and if he's not, you're against him, then nothing changes. I know a lot of people are going to be looking very carefully at polls over the next several days to see whether or not there's a real marked difference in the 90-plus approval rating that the president has among Republicans, and whether or not the feeling that, okay, this is over the line, we need an impeachment, not just an inquiry, but we need him removed from office. If that number really moves, particularly among Republicans, he's in trouble. If not, then I don't think anything changes. I think this is just chapter 25 in the rather remarkable 3 years we've been living through.
If you're McConnell right now, you got a whole bunch of Republicans up next year. You very conceivably could lose the Senate. Are you more worried about the next shoe that could drop in this probe, or are you more worried what possibly the president could say next?
Well, the line that everybody quotes is what the president himself said when he was running, that I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and my numbers wouldn't move. If you're McConnell, who has, from a strictly tactical view, played his hand brilliantly ever since he denied Obama the chance to nominate Merrick Garland, what you're looking at from his point of view is the president going to stabilize in the polls, or is his drop in the polls, particularly in a couple of the states where incumbent senators are up for election, going to jeopardize my hold on the Senate? Because one thing I think that we really ought to keep in mind, and it may sound counterintuitive given all the noise and the coverage about the president impeachment, is in some sense the vote for the Senate next year is at least as important as who gets to be president. Because if the Democrats take the Senate and the White House, then the Republican move toward taking over the federal judiciary is stalled. If the Senate stays Republican, even if a Democrat is elected, that Democrat won't nominate conservative judges, but there's every reason to think that McConnell will say, well, I'm not going to confirm your judges. And that's just one example. So I think you put your finger on a critical notion. How Mitch McConnell sees the standing of the president over the next couple of months, I think is going to be absolutely critical as to whether he simply, if the House impeaches, says, okay, we've taken it up and now we're going to dismiss the case, which the Republican majority could do, or whether there are enough Republicans, I don't know what that number is, say half a dozen in the Senate, who say, you know what, no, we've got to stand up for what we believe to be right, and we think the president, by his own acknowledgement, has behaved in a way that is, at best, highly questionable, and at worst, pretty much a flat-out abuse of power, which is one of the ways that you impeach a president.
Firstly, Jeff, you look at Pelosi now, and for folks who haven't read it, Jeff did a great piece in Politico a few days ago, 5 ways impeachment could play out. And I got to tell you, the scariest part of it is, I know you're being tongue-in-cheek with the 5th one, where literally you have all the talking heads from Fox trying to talk the president into resigning, and he throws him off the grounds and starts military conflicts all over the globe. I wasn't so sure that's not conceivable in today's day and age. But anyway, Pelosi seems to have to navigate. She's got to herd cats on different ends of the spectrum in her own party. She's got the political calendar to look at. She could either do a whole bunch of different committees simultaneously doing probes or streamlining it. So far, I think she's managed to keep everybody's eye on the ball, but I don't know how long it can last. If she's asking you for advice, again, with the American public being really the audience here to try and understand why this matters and to try and keep their attention, how should she go about it?
The biggest danger for Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats is that the furor, if I can call it that, for impeachment that has really been around since Inauguration Day on the more progressive left side of the caucus begins to dominate. One thing that you need to keep in mind is that the House Judiciary Committee, where impeachment would begin, is one of the most polarized committees in either house of the Congress. And so if this controversy develops into a partisan battle, if the Judiciary Committee, for instance, continues its really counterproductive method of 5 minutes of questioning for each of the 40 members, instead of having staff counsel with the time to develop what the argument is, then I think a lot of the country, the folks in the middle, are going to say, oh, this is just this is just another bit of Washington noise. It's the same old, it's a partisan wrangle. Her task, and it's not going to be an easy one, is to try to keep an impeachment process focused on what are the serious abuses of power that they're alleging, in a way that tries to reach people who are not already signed up for one team or another, who are saying, maybe we got to find out what happens. Impeachment's pretty serious. You don't remove a president because you just don't like him, or even if you think he's a terrible president. And that's going to be tough. The president went a fair distance today, I think this morning, in helping Pelosi's cause by acknowledging what his own supporters said. Oh, no, he wasn't really asking for that. He wasn't asking for a foreign government to get dirt on one of his potential opponents. And basically what the president says is, yeah, hold my beer. Sure I am. And I want China to do it too.
You know, obviously nobody, and if they do, they're full of it, knows how this plays out. But we get used to things that I think, for all of our sakes, are dangerous. I had a kid of mine say to me, did the president really say we could have a civil war in this country? And instead of couching it, I said, he retweeted it, but basically, yes. Do you think there's two schools of thought? We come out on the other side of this, however this thing ends, with such a fatigue that we're going to go back to some form of normalcy because people just don't want to live this way anymore in this country. Every day, just, you know, being jerked in different directions. Or he really will break this thing apart, and if we think we have partisanship now, just imagine if he's forced out. How do you think we come out on the other side of this?
Yeah, that's the question that kind of has been haunting me for a while. I mean, I thought for the last 4 years that there would be a point at which the traditional guardrails of American politics would kick in. Political parties aren't what they used to be. But the one function that I thought they still had when it came to picking a presidential nominee was vetting. And from almost the moment he announced president, Donald Trump has sort of broken through the norms. And you would think at this point, or the Access Hollywood tape, or firing Comey the way he did, or telling the Russians, I don't really care if you intervened in our election, that at some point his own party would say, you know, put partisanship aside. This is the kind of behavior we just can't have in a president. And the kind of language that you cited, there's, as far as I can tell, virtually no one on the Republican side yet, at least not on the elected officials, has said, wait a minute, you know, this is just really, really dangerous for a president to be talking this way, particularly one who enjoys the support of 90% of his party. It was very telling to me that, I guess until today, a fair number of Republicans said, you know, Trump never mentioned Biden on that phone call to the president of Ukraine. Well, it's in the transcript. Of course he did. And he said he did. The notion to sort of get behind whatever, in this case, the president says, no matter how much it violates what I thought was the kind of norm of how a president talks, as long as you've got a substantial number of people signed up with that, I'm not optimistic about where this heads.
If you haven't checked it out, folks, check out the piece, because there's 5 different scenarios that could play out here, including if Joe Biden gets weakened here and this scandal, even if it's not a real one, a manufactured one, if it brings him down, how does that also change the 2020 landscape? Jeff Greenfield, thank you so much for the time again. I appreciate it.
Sure.
And coming up next, one of the last Democratic holdouts over impeachment, Congressman Max Rose of New York. He now supports it. He just told us exactly why he's on board. Our conversation with the congressman up next.